little spread out. Okay. Can you hear me, guys? I don't know. Is it
Testing.
on? Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Daniel Keller. I'm an artist and some other stuff, I guess. And I'm really happy to be here on a panel with three people who I have known for a while in various degrees. Sprite, Milady Sonora Sprite, Troy Therrien, and John Rafman. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we want to make, internet culture, what it initially brought us into Urbit and made us interested in participating in a culture like this. So I'll just start off with that question. Start off with you first. Like, what made you want to make internet culture first?
I think the reason why I was attracted to the internet in the first place was it had the biggest databases, or like the biggest amount of content that I could sift through and restructure and repurpose into what I wanted. And I think the bigger and more accessible that content is, the more easily you can create culture by changing it. I don't know, that's my answer.
Sure. Great. You want to go?
Yeah. Why create it? So I'm the only non-artist, I guess.
You're not an artist.
Not an artist.
That's true. But I think that you are interested in creating new institutions, that's for sure. You're creating one now, and you are certainly involved in the art system. You're a curator at the Guggenheim. You certainly have intimate familiarity with the limits and potential of normal institutions. So.
Definitely the limits. So the short version of the long story is I grew up in like the middle of nowhere, like Western Canada, realized there was like a social ladder you could climb. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I'm going to climb that really hard and fast. Did that in New York City for a long time. Like, found myself in strange, unexpected, serendipitous situations that eventually led to like institutions with a lot of like big institutional clout. I was at like fancy schools. I was at the Guggenheim Museum for a while. And I had like enough ambition to get myself into boardrooms and stuff like that, and then like see how the sausage was made. It's fucking disgusting. It's literally war criminals and people that sell like heroin on the like literally the Sackler families on the board. And I'm sitting there like coming of age and coming to the awareness that like, oh, like how can I go downtown and have conversations with my friends and then go uptown to work? And like, this is the same industry, and these are the institutions that are somehow stitching this industry together. And it like, for a while, it was just sort of like, I was just some, dumb kid from nowhere. And then all of a sudden it was like, holy shit, it's real. And it became real when my boss got canceled. So like, she was the head curator at the Guggenheim Museum, and someone was like, you're racist on Twitter. And everyone's like, let's kill her. And then I got to see it from the inside, where I was like, she's not a racist. And all these people know she's not a racist. And all these people with like money and power and fucking really sketchy kind of, social graphs were like, oh, we're morally outraged. Let's write a letter and then let's leak it to the New York Times. And so I just got to see like the disgustingness of culture in New York, institutional culture in New York City, like slid off a cliff circa 2020. And I was like, fuck it, I'm out. And I wrote a letter and I'm like, I'm out of here, I'm not doing this. And spent like a couple years like operating behind the scenes, doing different things, and like trying to figure out if I think institutions are broken, should we make new ones, or like fuck institutions? And I kind of feel that I see institutions as honeypots. It's like when so much power, wealth, kind of cultural control is aggregated, then it's just going to attract really shitty people. And so what I'm, maybe we can talk more about this, but what I've been kind of trying to stitch together through using Urbit and blockchain and like literally moving to the countryside and buying an old military site in France is, can you create an institution that will be mission-driven beyond the people that set it up initially? And can it be decentralized enough such that power doesn't aggregate, so that 50 or 100 years in the future, should you be so lucky, like people that made money selling blood diamonds in Africa, like South Africa, don't show up and be like, I want to be on your board. So, yeah, anyways, that's my pitch.
Okay. Don?
I guess I came to, I was originally a net artist back in the aughts, and what attracted me to the internet at that time, at the beginning of Web 2.0, was that there was just such a excitement of finding all these new subcultures being formed with their own vernaculars and languages. And just this, for an artist, you're always searching for ways to communicate. It's hard to feel like your art has stakes and relevance if it's not like communicating to a lot of people, and especially in a way that feels new, at least for myself. So I feel like with the advent of Web 2 and all these, new communities that were forming and languages, a lot of the most important ones coming from 4chan, for example, but also Second Life. All my projects usually dealt with virtual exploration, and I was a sort of flaneur, amateur anthropologist exploring various virtual worlds in a sort of romantic journey of some sort. And it was a very exciting time, and I was just excited by the search and this kind of wandering without any point necessarily. And over the course of the next 15 years, it's not all bad, but the internet changed a lot, and I feel like I blame millennials, terrible generation. But, and it's also just I usually use the analogy of the Haussmannization of Paris, that Walter Benjamin gets into in his Arcades project, where in the Haussmannization of Paris, all the medieval back streets that the flaneurs would wander and just observe, like the new modern city, were bulldozed to create these very efficient modern giant boulevards that could, were good for capitalism and for suppressing, any sort of revolution, and thus destroying most of the arcades. And so similar things sort of happened in the internet, where it used to be you surfed the internet, and it was this exciting, you stumbling upon things, and then everything became filtered through 4 feeds, basically, right? And it's just a different internet now, and it's it's owned by a few tech monopolies, and also what happened with the polarization, and we know the whole story, and algorithms getting more sophisticated, where you don't even realize the propaganda, and that your views, you yourself, might as well be an algorithm because your ideology is so manipulated. So I guess I'm waiting for you guys to proselytize Web3 to me so I can onboard me. But my search has always been because the closest thing I found to the technological sublime is that feeling of discovering worlds within worlds within worlds, and that's what I think was what excited me to the internet. But when that still exists, and Discord and Zoomers kind of brought in a new era of that with anonymous identities. But yeah, I think that's the sort of, it's not necessarily a return to that, but just finding a way to reinvigorate, that feeling I had.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
I think you touched on anonymity, and that's a topic that I think is pretty important, especially as a generational divider between me and John and Sprite. I don't think, it wouldn't have been easy to have an anonymous art career back when John and I were starting. It wasn't really an option, and at least for me, it seemed very much like the internet was an accelerant for your IRL career. That was sort of what the best way that you could use it at the time, and there was not necessarily a venue for it to just exist online, be processed online, be consumed online, and most importantly, be purchased online. I found personally increasingly more friction from art world institutions based off of the kind of work that I was interested in making, and more the subject matter that I was interested in. And part of the reason why I co-founded New Models, which was a podcast and Discord channel and media platform, was to just have a new place. Thanks, Walt. It was a new place to talk about stuff that I just couldn't talk about elsewhere. And I missed the chance to have a pseudonymous career, but recently I created the first new artwork I've done in 7 years, and I did it anonymously, did an NFT drop, and it worked. And it did really unlock something for me where I was like, oh, okay, this is a totally new method that does work in theory. You maybe need to have some connections, but that was a real unlock for me. So the promise of Web3, which I love that I already said that in this, the promise of crypto media, let's say that instead, I'm going to coin that, is that you can go direct to consumer and you can create a new culture that is separate and you're actually independent because you're economically independent. Obviously, that was all a little bit overly dependent on market conditions, I think for everyone to feel like it was possible. But, I did this drop this year and it worked still. And I still think like, okay, there's something here. So I don't know, but I think, I'm wondering, you're face docs now.
Yeah.
So you're joining us with you're now a face docs millennial net artist like us, but I'm wondering if you felt that operating completely under a pseudonym was a limitation, and are you excited to have a new stage in your career where you are operating under your own name? And like, what do you think those conditions will change for you?
Yeah, I think it was exciting. I mean, obviously that was why I did it first. I think there's an anonymous career and like a doxed career, I guess. They kind of feel like the anonymous stuff feels like you can disperse stuff more easily. Like even before, like Milady, for example, before it was an NFT or anything like that, it was just a way that I could see if I could get an identity to catch on. Like before anything like that, I was like swapping with people. I would be like, you can be this character for a moment. And I could see how they liked it, and I could see this stuff that was like, yeah, it was like dispersive. And I think that's easier with an anonymous identity because you can loan out your identity to people and you can loan out your likeness to people without it coming directly back to you.
Sure.
And I think like a doxed art career probably lends to you creating more monolithic or like compressed objects that, say what they're trying to say more directly because you know that it's tied right to you. But yeah, that dispersion was interesting to me, and that's why I first did stuff anonymously.
I mean, you told me that the Milady PFP was the first image you ever created, basically, intentionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was studying like design, so I had done like layouts and stuff like that. But
That's
it was like
insane
it was like the first like painted image or sort of thing that I made.
Sort of like your like bop or something. I just feel like to go from like your first attempt to actually just become that viral to see, I don't know, Elon post that same image that you created, it must feel very surreal. And especially that entire time, it's not actually you. It's not your identity that's getting promoted. I'm sure it must be surreal, but I'm wondering what it felt like when that happened actually, when you saw the like full extent of that meme being spread. Yeah,
no, it is funny because like before we did Milady Makers and NFT, all the people I knew online just called me Milady, and we had to. That's why I had to add Sprite because it got too confusing. I had to like detach it from myself. But yeah, no, totally surreal to see people wearing what is more or less my likeness, form opinions about me, and then like talk back to me, and then like me, and then not like me, and then like me again. It's kind of bizarre because it's like, I don't know. It's like seeing a mirror.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you heard any similar situations where your work kind of became, I don't know, contextualized in a way that you weren't expecting or spread further or and any kind of complications that happened from that?
I mean, my first project that put me on the map was my Google Street View project, which went viral. So I'm sure that was, used in many, many different contexts. But I think that's, your work has succeeded, right? The whole point of the difference between the digital image proliferation and like the aura of like the high art world work of art is like it actually has more value when it is spread across the world. And like, what's interesting with, I guess, with the NFTs is that you can now monetize that, beyond just your brand. But yeah, I think, that was just, I think, a fundamental change. For example, in the past, if you're a video artist, and that's the core of my practice, you like guarded the editions of your work, and then you can only see them in institutions or if you own them. But I put all my work online because I feel like that actually just gives it more important. There's no reason anymore to kind of guard your work. If anything, the more context it's in, the more interesting it is, I think. I don't know if that was the question, but
Yeah.
I want to ask to Sprite, so Elon posts a Milady, right? Has MoMA collected a Milady?
I think they're a little bit scared. I mean, there's been institutions that have kind of reached out, and then that discussion kind of fizzles out. I think the idea is exciting, and then an intern or someone reaches out, and then
the arms dealer on the board is like, we can't stand for this morally.
Yeah. So I think it's become associated with so many different things, positive and negative, that it's very hard for it to clear all the checks.
Do you have a sense, for you personally, what that would mean for, say, a traditional arts institution to engage that way? Is that just yet another interesting thing, or is it somehow a bucket list thing? I'm just curious, the valence of traditional institutions in participating in work that's already kind of had cultural impact beyond those institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting for an institution to engage with it. I just think it will be hard for them to collect it and exhibit it in a meaningful manner because, I mean, a project like that, not only is it 10,000 images, and Milady kind of refers to the middle of the bell curve of those 10,000 images, it's also about the community and the cultural artifact that it's become. It would be, I'm not really sure how they would purchase that and how they would, then exhibit that or keep
it's your job as a curator.
Yeah, that's your job. But no, it's interesting. I hope they do it. I wonder which, Milady will become the one that becomes monolithic, that becomes the symbol of that. But
well, and it would be the product of a bunch of career curators sitting around a table for months, debating it in the most unengaged, that have never been on the Discord.
Yeah.
Or some intern that went on the Discord would be like, somebody said this about this one.
Oh, it could be terrible, actually. But
I feel like the only way they could successfully collect Milady would be then to have a Guggenheim employee post as Milady. You have to participate as it. That is part of it. That's also what is appealing to me about it from an outsider, was that you basically set the parameters of an institution within the framework of the art itself. And every individual instance is almost not important at all. And I can't really think of any other systems for doing that outside of a 10,000 PFP kind of collection. Obviously, painters, throughout their they will create maybe 10,000 paintings, and it has a similar effect, and collectors kind of probably perform those paintings as well, I imagine, to their friends or whatever. But it's a much slower process. It's not like a one-shot new institution, basically just minted. So I think that's really fascinating as just something that is fundamentally wasn't really possible to do even five years ago.
I mean, what I'm most excited by, things like Milady, is, and I think just in general with communities online is, and I kind of spoke of this earlier with my excitement with subcultures, is that building lore together and building worlds, community storytelling, and I feel like that if you can accomplish that, then you've succeeded. If it's reached the critical mass where there's enough people who want to get together and create a history and a mythology of some kind, and that is what I've searched for. And I think somebody was saying how it's good to gatekeep on some level because you don't want to just be able to know the whole lore right away. You have to earn it. You have to figure it out yourself, and that's actually makes it even more exciting. You want to engage more when you have to figure out the lore on your own.
John, how does that, do you think like existing institutions, sorry, that's like a dumb question, but like, can existing institutions do that in your experience? Have you like?
No, but I mean, that's the problem. I mean, first of all, definitely not in America. America's fucked beyond, like, I don't even know what's going to happen.
3 bullet points on America's fucked.
I mean, it's just insane. Like, I mean,
It's called Occupied Turtle Island,
I mean, North American, not only America, but like Canada too. I'm sure Australia. I don't know about New Zealand. You tell me. But yeah, it's just they're the most conservative. Like the art world is probably one of the most conservative on some, not the actual art world. I'm talking the institutional art world. So, I mean, but like, there's 2 questions. Can it do that in the first place? No, it wouldn't, because there's like too much committee stuff, and is this doing the right thing? It's just so ideological right now. But also, I think that was an issue just for. And what was interesting, I was coming out, like I said, of net art, and the transition from net art to post-internet is interesting. And Dan was actually, I think, the first true post-internet artist, because everybody was struggling to figure out how to put net art in the museums, and it was just a failed, it's just, you couldn't. There's an intimacy with the screen that you can't capture in the museum, and the museum has something else to offer. The wall, you know, there's something that's less consumer about being in a space, meditative space, than just like sitting on your laptop and scrolling. But you know, Dan was able to figure out a way to take that zeitgeist and consciousness and put it in a physical space. So I think that's also would be an issue with Milady's too, because so post-internet, like, you know, did that. That was the goal of it. But it was very different than net art. But even though there's some overlap in a Venn diagram. Wouldn't you say that, Dan?
Certainly. I mean, I also do think of, you know, I think of Milady and NFT collections and these things in general as very much a successor to a lot of the same kind of logic that was there, but without the sort of like intermediary steps of, you know, transmortifying the ideas into some object that is saleable. It sort of just short-circuited that. But I think a lot of the same kind of just ethos and mindset of surfing clubs and these kinds of collective, this is something that we also didn't talk about, but there was also kind of, I think, a precedent for collective art practice early on that was very much tied in with the turn between net art and post-internet. And sort of, there was these proto-DAOs, I guess you could call them, that created culture together in a very like,
what are those? What do you mean?
Surfing club. I mean,
yeah, okay,
so
yeah,
surfing clubs. I
yeah.
couldn't name any of them off my top.
Nasty Nets.
Nasty Nets. There you go. And then seeing how that kind of turned into a lot more of an institutional form with Arena, which was created by, you know, Cab, who is like classic net art, post-net surfer. And I know that, for instance, Charlotte Fang was one of the top posters on Arena, and I do think there's a really clear, direct conduit there. Yeah, a lot of the same ideas.
Billy, you didn't mention Billy.
And Billy,
He was on Nasty Nets. Yeah, it's very true. Did you follow any of that? Sprite, were you aware of what was going on? I know you're much younger than us, but did you follow?
At what period of time?
I mean, I guess you were 7 years old, so never mind. No, but, you know, what was your awareness of post-internet? Let's say you were a teenager then, so a little bit.
I mean, I went back and I looked at a lot of it, and I like use Arena and stuff like that. I've gone through and I've looked at a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
I actually think one of the things that I looked at first that kind of interested me in internet culture, or like the production of it, is I think it was actually something that you worked on, which was there was like an ARG attached to the 103.Never album.
Oh, yeah,
you were involved in that?
I think that's my most successful piece.
Yeah.
I dropped a video on 4chan, on Moo, on 4chan. Yep. And I feel like it was the first time in like semi-mainstream culture that there was like a reflection of the language of 4chan to themselves. In a way, I guess was the gentrifier. I was the first person to move into the neighborhood.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing that when it was releasing. I don't know. I thought that was interesting as like someone had succeeded to produce that kind of culture and then attach it to something which was
Cool.
big and successful.
But how do you see your generation, other than all the things we discussed, like anonymity and stuff, do you see like the mistakes we've made and not wanting to make the same ones? Or it's not conscious on that level?
I don't know. It's kind of
It's
hard.
kind of organic, probably.
It's kind of hard to draw a line. I don't know. I feel like there's people my age which are, functionally millennial just because of the media that they consume. I think like it's very easy for people to get left behind at this period of time. Like I think people can just consume not the wrong culture, but they can not keep themselves at the cutting edge and get left.
Oh yeah, I'm 42 years old. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to hog too much, but I just gave another artist talk yesterday in Berlin, and one thing I was talking about were digital ruins and like the death of virtual worlds, and like basically I went back to Second Life for the first time in 10 years, and huge. You can walk for days and not see another avatar, but there's all these huge, incredible, spaces that were like probably somebody poured their soul into that are just abandoned, and it just made me think of how easy and what a blasé attitude we have towards digital culture, like how much, is produced and at such an accelerated rate, and how much you just can just throw aside and not care about it. I feel like that is an interesting development in the sense of old ruins are so important to our culture, but even though these virtual spaces, you could have fallen in love, built communities, found yourself, and then they just disappear, with nothing, and they vanish into the ether. So I wonder if what'll happen with Miladies, or even our culture. You were so important back in the day, and talking about our 8's 3D, not Dan.
Yeah. No, that happens. No, I do wonder. Obviously, there's Rhizome, and I guess that's kind of the main organization that is attempting to archive that stuff in any way.
Yeah.
But I don't know I'm not sure if they have an NFT specific agenda. I don't know if you know about it.
Saying there's not the same. There's just a kind of, you don't look at these things in digital culture in the same way anymore. It's there's.
For me, it raises an interesting question. What would a post-internet elder be? What does it mean to get, to go through that moment of something so, to participate in art at a moment of such deep revolution, and then age through it, see it mutate and infect new generations. It's sort of what does a avant-garde modernist architect do in the 1970s or something, right? You guys aren't that old, but you will be that one day. And I'm curious, what is the responsibility for someone that basically to become an elder in something in an art form that's so ephemeral?
On a much more impoverished level, I think that path from idealism to disillusionment, that if you take in architecture, the modernist project, Corbusier's, utopian dreams ending up being the Pruitt ego, or just the horrifying projects that are dilapidated and not built with the proper materials, that being one example. The internet being, the beginning of it being, like I said, these utopian ideals, democratization, everybody's a content creator. So yeah, I guess we witnessed that, but I feel I'm not a doomer, because I feel as an artist, I don't care about so much anything other than just wanting to make a good work, and that's at the end of the day the goal. So I think I've seen so many transformations. I don't know, what do you think, Dan?
Well, I'm wondering what kind of work you feel that you have not been able to make that is dependent on, new institutions and new technological solutions for things. I will ask you, but also everybody.
To be brief, the AI, every time there's a new technological advancement, it's just, and most of the art world's pretty conservative, and just the reaction. I've already done 2 AI covers for rappers, and the insane, violent reaction against AI art is interesting because, there is just an inherent conservative impulse. But, I mean, because we fetishize the handmade and things that take a long time, but that's a whole other conversation. I think just the fact that, there's all these new tools in the past year or two, it just reinvigorates your practice. Just like, maybe you're reinvigorated by the ability to make NFTs anonymously and make money off them.
It was Midjourney. It was a
Yeah,
fully
exactly.
AI generated NFT
So
collection.
I feel like that also
couldn't do that.
keeps me going, and it's not doomer also because like Discord it's also impoverished way of communicating actually was great because it allowed for communities to find some sort of sense of a virtual space to like hang out and build a culture. So it's not perfect, but I think things are always changing, and it's exciting.
Troy?
Question is it the Hans Ulrich question? What's my unfinished project?
Well, yeah, I mean, is there anything that you feel currently that has been limited by current institutional support, technological support, some kind of combination of the two?
I found as soon as I left institutions and lost my anxiety about not being in institutions, it's been fucking magic. Mm-hmm. It's like I can do whatever I want. The support arrives. I feel I've also gone down a much more like spiritual path. I mean, it was really interesting. Interesting is the wrong word. It was very traumatic when my boss Nancy Spector got canceled, and canceled meant like literally career. Like she was like it was like murder. It was so fucking goddamn violent. Like this cabal of people got together and drummed up this anger, this fucking Wetiko, this egregore. And they shot like a lightning bolt through this one person. And you don't get to the top of the art world without making some enemies. But my God, you don't it was so inhuman. And the whole time, within there, I'm like calling board members and the director. I'm like, you gotta stop this. This is insane. No, and you realize very quickly you're all alone. Institution does not have your back. It's like fuck you.
Spineless. They're spineless.
Spineless, and on top of that, save themselves.
Yeah.
It could have been stopped at so many levels, and just the evil, the unbelievable evil. And as soon as I walked away from it, there was, in fact, the day that I quit, it was 4:00 in the morning. My wife and I both woke up, and she went to the bathroom and vomited. There's just this weird energy. So I burned some dragon's blood and did a Tolkien ritual, and cleaned the house. But I called a friend of mine who's a magician. I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, "You faced down the archons. Of course they're going to show up in the middle of the night." And it was the truest thing anyone had said to me in the whole experience. And as soon as that happened, it was just like anything I needed showed up. And not in excess, but we needed a little bit of capital to get out of the city, move to the countryside, and find a better school for my daughter who has a brain injury. And it happened. And then, these ideas started coming, almost in dream. Build this. And I was like, I'm going to build this. And then, a friend from a long time ago phones up, "Oh, yeah, I just did a PhD in blah, blah, blah." That's exactly what I need. And it was just one thing after another. So I don't know, maybe it's a personal experience, but I found that as soon as I left behind the part of my ego that was attached to institutions, and particularly these blood-sucking New York institutions, it was just like this fucking showering of good luck. And actually, a really good friend of mine who's in the audience right now, showed up in my life. Well, not showed up in my life. We've been friends for a really long time, but came to help support the project. And he literally flew out from New York 2 days ago to help me load a van to drive a weirdo float tank down here. It's just all this support just started happening, and I feel like there's no friction in my life right now in terms of what I want to create. It's just there. And I feel like at institutions, it was always just putting your elbows out. "Oh, I've got to carve out this territory. Oh, don't say that thing because that person has a relationship with that person. You can't do that." So I don't know. As soon as I dropped the institutional baggage, it's been heaven. And there's no stone left unturned.
So the institution is your friends.
Yeah, it's my best friend.
Sure, that's good.
I have a question for you guys. So I want to build an institution outside of the current, or I don't even know if it needs to be an institution, but how, as an artist, can I use crypto or Urbit or whatever, if I'm not trying to make an NFT, for example. If I want to build a world, but it's not necessarily, maybe it can have some components proselytized to me. Like, let's say I want to make a video game, okay? Have a video game that doesn't necessarily live on the chain, but, is there a way to use crypto or just what are ways that artists who are not necessarily, trying to make NFTs or anything specifically,
Yeah, well, I do think Urbit obviously expands the potential of NFT use cases, specifically Vaporware. I'm going to pitch them. The company I've been working with to work on Milady OS. What it allows you to do is basically gate software experiences as NFTs. And obviously there's been a lot of attempts at adding utility to NFTs, which was mostly a meme. But this is actually true. So you can have public consensus on the Ethereum blockchain. You can have private consensus, peer-to-peer on Urbit. And I do think that it kind of enables a new type of application that, in theory, if you have problems of institutions, including, let's say, the SEC, there are ways of circumventing that because you aren't necessarily delivering the content yourself. You're sort of offering up the code, and then other people serve it for themselves. So Urbit really is, I think, kind of a unique, specific set of affordances that, well, I don't think it's been done yet, but I honestly think it is kind of just the ingredients for a new type of institution, a new type of cultural institution. So I'm quite excited about it. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, there's limitations about what you can do there, but that is the most promising kind of just application for, let's say, post-Web3 true crypto that I know of right now.
I'll add one more to that because it's a obviously question that's spinning in my head for a while. And I think one of the biggest questions around institutions, one of the biggest issues that I've faced in personal life that I'd like to be able to offer a solution to is governance, like who decides. And with the DAO kind of progression, one of the gov tokens, right? But gov tokens is just corporate governance. It's I buy more shares, I have more votes. So one thing that we're working on with me and my partners, my team, my whatever, is like, could you separate ownership and governance? Okay, easy. But then what dictates who governs? And the stuff that we're building, that we're working on out in the middle of nowhere is like initiation technology, like initiation protocol. And so the idea is, could you basically have, and this is a Platonic idea, right? So like Plato basically said, however many thousands of years ago, that like, he's like, democracy is dumb. It's just going to become tyranny. Like the smart rich people, whatever, control the other people with media or whatever, sophistry. And so for him, a step beyond that was like the republic idea where you have like a guardian class. And so I've always wondered, like, what would be a guardian class? For Plato, it was like, okay, you have to be like castrated and go into the military, and you can't have children, and there's all these things that like stop you from having bad motivations to kind of build a kind of wall around, like build a moat around the power that you can accrue. And the only thing that I've come across that makes somebody a better person, insofar as I would trust them to be in control of assets or a mission that I would want to participate in, is these processes of initiation. And I think like culture that I come from, this Western culture, has completely lost its sense of what initiation is. And it was, that's what I really enjoyed about our lunch today, just before we came on here. We were all sharing stories, and I feel like a word that I might use for things that we've gone through, all four of us in the last few years, feels very like initiatory.
Yeah.
Sort of, right? Like step into a new stage of life. And that's why I'm wondering, like, where are the elders? Because when I looked around in New York at these big fancy institutions, I'm like, it's all children, 75-year-old children. There's no elders. And you get to elderhood through processes of initiation. So I don't know, that would be one of my answers to your question, is like, how do you reinstitute initiation and use that as a process for governance?
Cool.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Open it up.
Anybody has any questions for us? Can someone give him a mic? Yeah?
Microphone.
So for me, one of the many parts about what good art is something that's not exactly safe. So I wonder if you can describe is that something that also resonates with you? And if not, why not?
I mean, 100% resonates with me, and that's also my problem with institutions is they're so conservative, and And that's what I feel. I guess I love AI art right now. I mean, using AI. I mean, 99.9% of AI art is god awful, but 99.9% of art is terrible. And that's something I have to cope with using AI, because there's so much censorship, especially if I'm using the big ones. But yeah, I think that's key, is to capture the darkness of reality, the moral ambiguities, all that stuff, which, in very institutional settings, corporate settings, it's more difficult to do that because of, various political or capitalist reasons. So 100% necessary. You can't make good art without doing that. You can't make, and actually talking to some of the people who run these big AI platforms, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but there's a profound Philistinism in the tech world, because I feel like they haven't had humanities educations, just the nature of the world these days. So, and when you don't, read a certain amount of, or experience a certain level of art, that grows, that gives you depth, in the soul, and you understand that it's important to deal with those things. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know the solution to that, but I think, yes, it's important.
I think it's also important to separate safeness from edginess. I don't think
I'm
that
not saying
they aren't
edgy to be
necessarily
edgy.
one on one. And I think one of the things that
Yeah.
obviously works about Milady is it is incredibly innocuous as far as the imagery goes, and any of the darkness or whatever or danger is, you have to kind of be initiated into seeing that. I mean, I guess you kind of are exposed to it on Twitter, but yeah. So I think that that's just a really important distinction to make. That's all. I don't know if you have anything to say.
I mean, I think that an artist's job is to go and find something that people don't know and bring it and package it and show it in a way that's new or interesting. I think if your art is being classified as safe, then you're probably not going far enough in your search for that new thing or that aesthetic that you're trying to present.
Yeah. Should we get another question? Both.
The Guggenheim example is interesting to me because I think of the Guggenheim originally being founded as I think was the Museum of Non-Objective Painting, and it was quite controversial for it to be doing what it was doing at that point in time. I'm curious how you all think about, if the story of progress in art and culture is institutions become calcified, new people try to fight against them, those things eventually become institutional and gather power, and then they calcify, et cetera. Is there a point of samsara where we no longer need to be subject to that cycle of constant calcification and fighting back, or is that just the way that this system is always going to work?
I struggle with that question every day, right? I think it was sorry for such an obnoxious footnote, but I think Bruno Latour in a recent book, he was it's someone I kind of looked up to, but also an okay boomer kind of guy. He was all our institutions are failing. We must build new ones. I was why? But then you're kind of well, if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? And I think, I don't know. I kind of think the wheel of samsara is going to spin no matter what. And yeah, I don't have an answer to what do you build in place of an institution other than another institution. And maybe it's, maybe I'm submitting myself to the idea that maybe you just kind of chip away at the pieces that are most apparently broken. But I don't know if that's progress or if that's just a wheel spinning.
Could I flip it and ask you, because I feel like one of the issues is the HRification of the world. Everything, HR has destroyed our reality. And you, having started, the community you have, you probably have to deal with that horror all the time. So, how do you deal with human resources?
Dan knows.
Yeah, I do.
I didn't start it, just to clarify that really quickly before people on a Discord call for my name to be dragged through the mud and flayed and quartered. I think that a certain amount of HRification is good, right? One of our biggest problems at FWB was that people who should have been treated better and deserve to be onboarded and offboarded into the team that builds and works on stuff with dignity were treated really poorly because of the like lack of like consciousness about how to do that in a dignified way amongst the people who are running the show. But I think that where that becomes a problem is that like you can't just like have the rules and follow the rules to the letter. I think the most important thing in any kind of organization is knowing like when to bend and break the rules, when it's going to produce results that are necessary for the organization to thrive, for the community to grow and evolve, et cetera. But I think that ultimately like knowing when to break things and to deal with the fallout and to look through the rubble to find what's going to be next and new is something that I think people have forgotten how to do.
Yeah.
And a willingness to be uncomfortable and to find what's next and what's broken is one of the most important things when you're building a community or building an institution.
Because they're also terrified because you're held hostage. So like, you know, you just self-preservation as well.
Okay, well, we're unfortunately out of time. Maybe, do we, I don't, one more question?
There's
maybe?
one more question.
Can we get, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, just one.
All right.
Does the rejection of institution also translate to the rejection of art school? Or do you think Miladies can be taught, you know, how would you feel about Miladies being, can you teach Miladies?
Being used as an example?
As an example? Well, I don't know. I mean, just how would you feel about all of that? And also, yeah, the broader question of rejecting art school and the, like, you know, in the post-internet art world. Or can internet art be canonized?
Yeah, I mean, I studied industrial design and then I dropped out to answer your question about, I don't know whether or not I went. I think you could teach them. I don't know what you would teach them. I think it would probably just end up being used as an example for a lesson on how to create community, perhaps. Or how to create, I don't know, an edge case. But yeah, I don't think they're going to be an example on any sort of technical painting level or anything like that as an image.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that art school is the source of the central contradiction in the art world, schizophrenic level contradiction in the art world, that your radical Marxist education creating luxury objects for, you know, wealth criminals, to say pejoratively. So I can't really think of any field that is quite as inherently, you know, paradoxical. So yeah, I think probably it's not worth it to go to art school. You're gonna get some weird ideas that aren't very applicable to your actual job. Okay, I think that's it though.
Don't go to school.